If I were to ask where Europe stood on a lot of those, I'm afraid I'll get a long silence. If it is a matter of principle, why didn't Europe cut on the first day? If that, it's manageable. No, it's manageable.
Maybe a little bit of an
it's
overstatement.
manageable. You understand one thing. At the end of the day, we make judgments in foreign policy based on what we think are our long-term interests and what is good for the world.
Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for taking your time. In 2022, about 18,000 people from India have applied for political asylum in Austria. For several months, there was no other country with more asylum seekers here. How would you explain that?
Well, I mean, I don't know the numbers. If you say so, I have to take you at your word. But my sense is that when it comes to irregular migration, sometimes, because these are done by syndicates and gangs, you never know where they end up with. I think what's important is not what happened in the past. It is that we have a commitment to ensure that movement and mobility is legal. We would like a regime, an agreed regime for that. It's good for the global workplace. It's good for the Austrian economy. And we have, that's one of the outcomes of my visit to Vienna.
Another outcome is that you have assured Austria's foreign minister that India will take back all of its citizens who will not get asylum in Austria, which will probably be almost 100%. How fast will this happen?
Look, in terms of our citizens, if they're proven to be our citizens, we obviously have an obligation in that regard. But what is important for us is to validate the fact that if there's somebody who's staying illegally, that they are our citizens. If there are citizens, usually we work it out between the governments concerned. I can't give you a time frame on it because it depends on what is the level of proof that is provided for us and what are the preparations on the Austrian side.
So you did not agree on a time frame today?
No, we didn't. Frankly, we didn't get into that kind of discussion. That is for the immigration people to decide. As foreign ministers, what we did was to work out an agreed mobility and movement regime. So we were looking for solutions. We weren't into the details of returnees' problem. That there are other people whose jobs it is to do that.
Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. As you are well aware, the whole world noticed that India, as a very influential country, has never publicly condemned Russia's assault and invasion into a neighboring country. Why is that so? Can you really be neutral in a war for which obviously one side bears all responsibility?
Well, look, I think in international relations, you have sometimes very complicated situations. And where we are concerned, we have always taken the position that the way out is for the countries concerned to get back to dialogue and to diplomacy.
I'll come to that soon, but is this a complicated situation? Is this really complicated? There's just one big country invading its neighbor.
No, look, I can give you many instances of countries who have violated the sovereignty of another country. If I were to ask where Europe stood on a lot of those, I'm afraid I'll get a long silence. So do understand one thing. At the end of the day, we make judgments in foreign policy based on what we think are our long-term interests and what is good for the world.
But you and Prime Minister Modi, you have already said that regularly call on both sides to stop the war and to negotiate. However, can one really urge Ukraine to stop defending itself? After all, there are no Ukrainian tanks in Russia. There are Russian tanks and planes and missiles destroying Ukraine.
I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation. I think what we do is to say, get back to dialogue and diplomacy. There was dialogue and diplomacy in the early days of the conflict. So it's not that it didn't happen. So it's not for us to put conditions and to say this country is equal to that country. That's your judgment.
But shouldn't you urge Russia to stop the war?
I think we have been very clear that this conflict is not in anybody's interest, including theirs.
But you wouldn't say it more explicitly?
I'm a diplomat. It is my job to conduct foreign policy which serves my national interests and which serves what I believe is a long-term pathway towards peace and dialogue.
Let's talk about India's interests. India does not take part in Western sanctions against Russia, but has increased its imports from Russia 5 times since the war began. By this, are you not helping Moscow? Are you not financing Russia's war?
You know, Europe imported in the same period 6 times the energy which India did. So
but Europe decreased its imports a lot and dramatically. Since the war started, you multiplied yours.
No, essentially, if it is a matter of principle, why didn't Europe cut on the first day? Why didn't we see on 25th of February a complete cutoff of energy imports from Russia?
But
you can't say it's my principle, but by the way, I will do it by my timing.
Okay, but isn't it the difference between decreasing your imports but still making sure that Europe is not freezing to death in the winter, or just increasing your imports by 5 times?
No, Europe has managed to reduce its imports while doing it in a manner in which it is comfortable for Europe.
Comfortable?
It's manageable.
It's maybe a little bit of an overstatement.
Now, if at 60,000 euros or whatever is your per capita income, you are so caring about your population. I have a population at $2,000. I also need energy. I'm not in a position to pay high prices. The price of oil has doubled. So, and what Europe is doing is also moving into the Middle East and diverting production out of the Middle East into Europe and raising prices. So European actions actually are putting pressure on the global oil markets and on my imports as well. So I think it's something which, if European political leadership understandably would like to soften the impact on their population, I think it's a privilege they should extend to other political leaderships as well.
Are you reluctant toward Moscow as well, because Russia is India's most important supplier of weapons and military equipment?
And therefore?
Are you reluctant to criticize Moscow?
No, I think, look, we have a relationship with Moscow. We've had a long-term relationship with Moscow. I think it's important to look at that history of the relationship. It was a relationship built in a period when Western democracies used to arm a military dictatorship called Pakistan and deny India defensive weapons. So if we are talking about principles, let's talk a little bit of history out here. So how did the Indian exposure to Russia and previously to Soviet Union get built up? Because the Western democracies, for whatever reason, decided that their natural partner in our part of the world was a military dictatorship.
Would you consider India an ally of Russia?
No, I think India doesn't. We are an independent country. We do not define ourselves or perceive ourselves in alliance terms. That's very much a Western terminology. It's not a term that we use.
Before you said you're a diplomat, but several weeks ago you called Pakistan, your neighbor, the epicenter of terrorism.
Well, I did it again today without using the word Pakistan.
Yes, and this doesn't sound very diplomatic, does it?
No, because you are a diplomat doesn't mean you're untruthful. I could use much harsher words than epicenter. So believe me, considering what has been happening to us, I think epicenter is a very diplomatic word, because this is a country which has attacked the Parliament of India some years ago, which attacked the city of Mumbai, which went after hotels and foreign tourists, which every day sends terrorists across the border.
But of course not as a country.
Well, if you control your sovereign space, which I believe they do, if the terrorist camps operate in broad daylight in cities with recruitment and financing, can you really tell me that the Pakistani state doesn't know what's going on? Especially if they're being trained in military-level combat tactics. So, you know, when we speak about judgments and principles, why don't I hear sharp European condemnation of these practices which have been going on for multiple decades?
Does the world have to be concerned that there someday will be a war between India and Pakistan?
I think the world has to be concerned that there is terrorism going on, and the world often looks away. The world often feels it's not my problem because it's happening to some other country. I think the world needs to be concerned about how sincerely and strongly it takes up the challenge of terrorism.
But has the world to be concerned about the future war between India and Pakistan?
I think the world needs to be concerned about terrorism.
That's what you said.
Yeah, sure. Because look, if you pose it the way you do, that's like giving a free pass to terrorism, saying, you know, let's worry about the next consequence of it. I am worried about the terrorism.
Okay, let's change the subject. You frequently said that India has a very complicated relationship with your neighboring China. Many people around the world are quite concerned that China might, in the near future, intervene militarily in Taiwan. Do you share this concern?
I think there's a larger concern which is based on our experiences. The concern is that we had agreements with China not to mass forces in our border areas. And they have not observed those agreements, which is why we have the currently tense situation that we do. We had an agreement not to unilaterally change the line of control, which they have tried to unilaterally do that. So there is, I think, a perception that we have which derives directly from our experiences. Now, where else the status quo may change or not change, I would hesitate as a foreign minister to predict publicly. I may have my own views and assessments. But I certainly can share my experience, and my experience is that written agreements were not observed, that we have seen levels of military pressure which in our view has no justification.
China would say the opposite. They would say that India had not obeyed different agreements. But obviously, you see it
No,
otherwise.
I think it's difficult for China to say that for this reason. The record is very clear because today, there's a lot of transparency. You have satellite pictures. If you see who moved the forces to the border areas first, I think the record is very clear. So it's very difficult for China to say what you suggested they could.
India will probably overtake China as the world's most populous country within this year. Is this fact of any political significance to India, or is it just a mere statistic?
We'll know that when we reach there, won't we? Yeah, because we have never used numbers in that manner. Maybe other countries have. I would still say, to a large extent, it is a statistic, but you will have a situation where the world's most populous country is not among the permanent members of the Security Council. And what does it say about the state of the UN if that is the case? So it's a kind of both a yes and a no. It's partly a statistic, but I think it's a statistic which means a lot.
For several years, you have called for a permanent seat on the Security Council, as have Brazil, as has Japan or Germany. How long will it take, from your point of view, till this reform of the Council will actually become reality?
Well, ideally, we'd like it yesterday.
Of course.
But the problem, I think, is that those who are today enjoying the benefits of permanent membership clearly are not in a hurry to see reform. I think it's a very short-sighted view, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, the credibility of the UN and, frankly, their own interest and effectiveness is at stake. So my sense is it will take some time, hopefully not too much time. I can see a growing body of opinion among UN members who believe that there must be change. It's not just us. You have entire Africa, entire Latin America left out. Developing countries vastly underrepresented. I think the state of the world, this was an organization invented in 1945. It's 2023.
And when you would have to guess for a year when this will happen, what would it be?
No, I wouldn't guess because I know the complexities of this process. It's a tough one. I'd be honest with you. It's a tough one, but I don't think because it's a tough one we should give up. On the contrary, I think because it's a tough one, we should actually up the ante, increase the feeling in wide parts of the world that this reform is absolutely essential.
Thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure.